If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The Arizona wind came in steady waves, dry and sharp enough to sting the skin. The afternoon light was fading into the dull orange that meant another day gone without rain. Elias Rourke crossed the yard behind his cabin, his limp heavy after hours repairing the barn roof. He had been alone out here for 6 years, ever since the war ended and the army had no more use for men like him. Men who had seen too much and spoken too little. His days were all the same: fix, feed, rest, and start again. The silence was the only thing that stayed loyal. He had built this cabin himself, on land no one wanted, dry, cracked, and miles from the nearest settlement. He didn't need company, or so he told himself. It was easier that way. Easier than remembering faces that were gone, or the Apache camp that burned one night under orders he never questioned aloud. He reached the trough to give the horse water and noticed a shape lying half in the mud. His first thought was coyote, then mule, then something human. He felt his stomach tighten. Grabbing his rifle from the fence post, he stepped closer. The figure shifted, a low sound escaping her throat. It was a woman. She lay on her side, her breathing uneven. Her skin was sunburned and raw from wind exposure, and the deerskin dress she wore was torn at the shoulder, dark with dried blood. Her hair, black and tangled, covered half her face. Elias crouched, watching her chest rise and fall before setting the rifle aside. He touched her wrist. Warm, faint pulse. Alive. "Ma'am," he said quietly, unsure if she spoke English. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids moved. She tried to speak, but the words came out broken. He couldn't make them out. She looked half-starved, her lips cracked, her throat dry. Elias hesitated. He had taken oaths once, to fight, to obey, to protect, but none of them seemed to fit this situation. He could ride out and leave her, tell himself the desert would do the rest. It wasn't his problem, but that was the kind of man he had been back then, and he'd spent 6 years trying not to be that man anymore. He lifted her gently, surprised at how light she was. Her head fell against his chest, her breath shallow but steady. The door creaked as he pushed it open with his boot and carried her inside. The cabin was small, one room with a cot, a table, a stove, and shelves lined with tools and a few tins of food. He laid her on the cot, fetched water from the barrel, and knelt beside her. As he cleaned the wound on her shoulder, she winced and turned her face away. He could see it was a knife cut, maybe a few days old, crusted with dirt. She'd been running from something or someone. She tried to push his hand away once, but her strength failed. "Easy," he said. "You'll live if you don't fight me." He poured water between her lips. She drank slowly, eyes closed. Then, after a long pause, she whispered Naeli. He understood it was her name. "Elias," he replied. "You're safe here." The words didn't mean much. He wasn't sure anyone was truly safe out here, but he said them anyway. She drifted in and out of sleep as he cleaned the rest of her cuts. He moved with care, the way he once tended to wounded soldiers in the field. The smell of old wood and smoke filled the cabin. Outside, wind hit the shutters in short bursts. When she finally slept, Elias sat by the table and watched the fire die down. His hands trembled slightly. It had been years since anyone else had been inside these walls. The sound of another person's breathing felt almost foreign. He studied her face, tough, proud, yet tired in a way that went deeper than injury. Apache, clearly. He'd known enough to tell by her dress and the turquoise ornaments around her neck. The thought made something shift inside him. Memories he had spent years burying came back. Smoke, screams, the flash of orders shouted in the dark. He forced them down. Elias told himself it didn't matter who she was or what she'd done. She needed help, and that was all there was to it. But part of him already knew that nothing in this desert ever stayed simple for long. Outside, the last light faded behind a ridge. He checked the door, then sat in the old chair near the cot. She stirred once, murmuring something in Apache, and then was still again. He watched her breathe, steady now, her chest rising under the torn fabric. For the first time in years, Elias didn't feel entirely alone. He didn't trust that feeling, but he didn't chase it away either. He leaned back, his eyes heavy but alert, the old rifle resting against his leg. He didn't know why she was here, who she had been running from, or what it would cost him to have found her. But for now, he knew this much. She was alive and under his roof, and he would see her through the night. When morning came, the desert air was cool and still, carrying the faint smell of wet dust after a night of wind. The storm had left thin traces of moisture on the cabin roof, but the land was as dry as ever. Elias stepped outside, checked the water barrel, and looked toward the corral. His horse was restless but unharmed. Everything else, the fences, the tools, the world, was the same. Only the inside of his cabin had changed. Someone else was breathing under that roof now. He went back in and found Naeli awake, sitting up on the cot. Her face looked different in daylight, stronger, less pale, but her eyes were wary. She had taken one of his shirts and tied it around her wounded arm. The bandage he'd made it come loose. She had tried to fix it herself, which said enough about her pride. He placed a bowl of boiled beans and some dry bread on the table. She didn't move at first, just stared at him. "Eat," he said. "It's all I have." After a moment, she stood, walked to the table, and ate slowly, her movements careful. Elias watched her, saying nothing. He noticed the faint scars on her hands, marks from ropes, tools, and what looked like burns. He wondered how far she had come, what she had survived, but he didn't ask. Questions weren't his habit anymore, and she looked like someone who wouldn't answer them anyway. When she finished, she said softly, "You live alone here?" "Yes." "Why?" He hesitated, but there was no reason to lie. "Because I don't belong anywhere else." She nodded once, like she understood. The silence stretched between them, steady but not cold. She looked around the cabin. The single chair, the shelf of tools, the pile of firewood stacked neatly by the wall. "You build this?" "Every board." She looked impressed, though she didn't say it. "You soldier before?" He froze for a second. "Scout. Long time ago." She didn't push further, but he felt the weight of her unspoken curiosity. The army, the past, the things he did, all of it hung in the air like a loaded gun waiting for someone to notice. Later that morning, Naeli tried to stand and nearly fell. Elias caught her arm before she hit the ground. She pulled away quickly, but not fast enough to hide her embarrassment. "You'll tear that wound open," he said. "I can walk." "Not far." "Sit." Her jaw tightened, but she sat back on the cot. He poured her water and set it beside her. "You should rest," he said. "You've lost blood." "I lost more than that," she muttered under her breath. He didn't respond. He knew the sound of grief when he heard it. It had its own rhythm, quiet, clip without tears. He'd spoken like that once too, years ago, when the army left him with a limp and a conscience he couldn't fix. By midday, she was asleep again. He stepped outside, started chopping firewood, and tried to clear his mind. But something in him had changed. For years, he had kept the world outside his fence. Now a stranger lay in his bed, bleeding into his blankets, and he didn't want her gone. As the day passed, he caught himself watching the door, listening for movement. He didn't understand why. It wasn't desire, not yet. It was something else, a kind of pull that came from seeing another soul still fighting to stay alive when most would have given up. When dusk came, Naeli woke again. She looked stronger. "Why you help me?" she asked suddenly. He was by the stove, stirring beans again. He didn't turn around. "Because you were dying." "Many people die," she said quietly. "Not your problem." He looked at her then. Maybe I needed to do something that wasn't a problem. She studied his face, trying to read him. "You are not priest." "No," he said. "Not even close." The way she said it wasn't mocking. It was truth meeting truth. After they ate, she asked, "How far to the nearest town?" "About a day's ride east. If you're thinking of leaving, you'll need a horse." "I walk." "You won't make it on foot." She gave a small shrug, her eyes still on the fire. "I make it before." "You were dying before," he said. She didn't answer. The night grew quiet again. Elias checked the rifle by the door out of habit. He hadn't asked who had hurt her or what she was running from. But her wound looked clean, not like a battle mark. It was a knife cut, deliberate. Someone wanted her dead. He wondered if they would come looking. When he returned to his chair, Naeli was still awake, staring at the flames. "You think I bring trouble," she said. Trouble's been here longer than you, he replied. A faint, tired smile crossed her lips for the first time. It changed her face, made her look alive again. She lay back down after that, and he stayed awake long into the night. Every sound outside, the wind, the creak of wood, felt sharper. He didn't know if she trusted him or if he trusted her. But he knew this. The cabin no longer felt empty, and that alone was enough to unsettle him. He thought of her name, Naeli. He turned it over in his head, the way a man does when trying to remember something he never knew. He wondered where she had come from, who she had lost, and how much of her pain was his to share. He also wondered if she'd leave once she could walk again. Before he drifted into half-sleep, he whispered to himself, maybe that's for her to decide. Outside, the wind carried dust across the plains. Inside, two lives stayed bound by silence and survival. One trying to heal, the other trying to remember what it meant to care. The night passed without threat, but something unspoken had shifted. Neither of them would be the same when the sun rose again. The days began to take shape around quiet routines. Elias rose before dawn, fed the horse, fixed the water barrel, and tended the small patch of corn behind the cabin. Naeli stayed inside at first, watching from the window. Her wound healed slowly, but she insisted on doing small tasks, washing dishes, cleaning, mending torn clothes that had sat untouched for years. The rhythm was new but not unpleasant. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer made of distance, but of something waiting to be said. Elias noticed she no longer looked afraid. She moved with calm purpose, like someone who had learned to survive without asking for help. He respected that. She didn't owe him gratitude, and he didn't expect it. Yet, sometimes when she spoke in her broken English, he found himself listening not to her words but to her tone, careful, direct, never uncertain. There was strength there that reminded him of the people his orders had once hurt. One afternoon, she stepped outside for the first time since the storm. The sun was strong, and she squinted against the light. Elias watched from the barn as she touched the fence rails, ran her hand along the dry wood, and looked out over the valley. The land stretched wide and empty, red soil, sagebrush, rocks shaped by years of wind. Your land, she said quietly. He nodded. What's left of it? You work alone? Always. Why? He hesitated before answering. Because it's easier that way. She looked at him, reading the truth behind the words. Easier for who? He didn't answer. She didn't press further. That night, the fire burned low as they ate. Naeli asked questions she had avoided until now. You said you were scout. Army scout. Yes. You fight Apache? He stopped chewing, set down his fork, and looked into the flames. I did what I was told. Her gaze didn't move. What did they tell you to do? He leaned back in the chair, his voice steady but flat. Track camps. Deliver messages. Led soldiers through canyons. She stared harder, her breathing shallow. Which canyon? South Ridge, near Black Mesa. Her face changed. The quiet around them turned heavy. My village was there, she said. Her tone wasn't a question, it was fact. Elias didn't look up. He felt the weight of what she said before she even finished the words. The fire crackled. She stood slowly. You remember? He nodded once. Too well. My husband died that night, she said, her voice low, shaking slightly. My brothers. My son. Elias swallowed hard. He had known something like this might come, but hearing it made his chest tighten. I didn't know who was there, he said. They gave orders. We followed. She took a step toward him. You followed. Her tone was sharp now. You followed, and people died. Children died. He looked up at her, his eyes tired. Yes. The word hung between them. She could see he wasn't defending himself. There was no denial, no excuse. That was worse somehow. She turned away, her hands trembling. You killed them. I didn't pull the trigger that night, he said quietly, but I led them there. Her jaw tightened. That is same. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The air inside the cabin felt smaller, every sound louder. She stood near the door, breathing hard, her body rigid with anger. Elias didn't move, didn't reach for her. He knew what he would do if their roles were reversed. Why help me then? She asked finally. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist. Because I saw someone left to die, and I've seen enough of that. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. You think this makes peace? No, he said. It doesn't make anything. But maybe it stops something from getting worse. She shook her head, pacing, her voice unsteady. You should be dead. Maybe, he said, but I'm not. You're not afraid? Every day. Naeli stopped moving. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something heavier, confusion, exhaustion, a kind of grief too deep for shouting. She sank into the chair by the fire, her hands pressed to her temples. The silence that followed was long and cold. Elias didn't speak again. He only watched the light from the fire move across her face, the same face that once could have been in his rifle's sight. The thought made him sick. Outside, wind hit the cabin walls again. The boards creaked. Elias stood and walked to the door. If you want to leave, I won't stop you, he said. But if you stay, I won't lie to you. I did what I did. I can't change it. She didn't answer. Her body stayed still, her eyes fixed on the flames. When he lay down on the floor near the door that night, he didn't sleep. Every breath reminded him of what had surfaced, what he had buried too deep. Near dawn, when the first gray light touched the window, Naeli spoke from the cot. You could have killed me when you found me, she said softly. I thought about it, he admitted. But I couldn't. Why? Because maybe that was my chance to do one thing right. She didn't respond, but she didn't tell him to leave either. As the sun rose, the cabin filled with the smell of dry air and wood smoke. The space between them was no longer silence. It was truth, raw, heavy, and alive. Elias looked at her once before stepping outside to start the day. He didn't know if she'd still be there when he returned, and maybe that was fair. But when he heard the sound of her moving inside, slow, tired, but still there, he let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The war had ended years ago, but for the first time, Elias felt like he was finally facing it. The sun rose slow and pale, stretching long shadows across the yard. Elias fed the horse, his hands moving automatically, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The air still carried the tension from the night before. Every sound, the creak of the stable door, the soft crunch of his boots in the dirt, felt sharper now, as if the silence itself was watching. Inside the cabin, Naeli hadn't moved since dawn. He could feel it, the heavy stillness behind the door, the weight of what had been said. He stayed outside longer than usual. He fixed the broken fence, gathered wood, checked the traps by the creek, anything to keep from going back inside. His body worked, but his mind didn't quiet. Her words echoed again and again. You killed them. He'd heard accusations before, but this one came from someone who had lived through the wreckage he helped create. There was no defense, no comfort. Still, when he finally returned, he found her awake, sitting by the table with the water cup in her hands. Her eyes were distant but calm. I'll leave when my arm heals, she said without looking up. He nodded, setting his tools by the wall. That's your choice. I can't stay here with you. I understand. Her voice trembled slightly. I don't know if I hate you or not. Elias sat opposite her. You don't have to know. For a while, neither spoke. The faint wind outside pushed dust against the windows. Then, quietly, she said, You have family? No. What happened? He hesitated, then answered truthfully. My wife died before the war. Fever. The baby, too. Naeli's eyes softened a little. You were alone after that. Still am. You could have gone back east. There's nothing east for me. She studied him. So you stay here? With ghosts. He nodded slightly. Yes. Her tone lost its edge. You're not like the others I saw. Soldiers. They laughed when people died. He looked down at his hands. Maybe once I was. The conversation ended there. She stood slowly, went to the door, and stepped outside for the first time since confronting him. Elias followed a few minutes later, keeping a distance. Naeli walked toward the edge of the property, stopping by the fence that looked out over the canyon. The view stretched wide, dry hills, scattered mesquite, and far-off ridges that caught the light like dull metal. She stood there quietly, her hand resting on the fence post. This land, she said, not turning to him, it remembers everything. Elias nodded. Maybe that's why it never feels alive. It feels alive to me, she said. Because I'm still here. Her words carried a quiet strength, the kind that came from survival, not hope. Elias respected that more than forgiveness. He didn't want her to forgive him. He only wanted to give her space to exist without fear. That evening, she cooked for both of them. It was the first time she touched his food or his fire. The beans were salted too much, but he ate without complaint. They sat at the same table, sharing what little there was, and for a few short minutes, it felt almost like peace. After dinner, Nayeli said, "When I was small, my father told me not to trust white men. He said they always take something." Elias listened quietly. He was right. She looked at him. "But you didn't take. You lost." He met her gaze for a moment, unsure what to say. "Maybe losing was the only thing I ever earned." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened again before she looked away. "You think too much," she said. "Comes from not talking much," he replied. That night, she didn't sleep on the cot. Instead, she laid her blanket near the hearth where the fire's warmth reached better. He said nothing, only nodded when she passed him. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like punishment. It felt like understanding. Outside, coyotes called somewhere in the hills. Elias sat by the table, cleaning his rifle, where he caught her looking at him from the floor. "What will you do if I leave?" she asked suddenly. He shrugged. "Same as before. Feed the horse. Fix fences. Stay alive. You don't want more?" He paused, meeting her eyes. "I used to. Now I just want quiet." She thought about that for a long time. "Quiet is not living," she said. "Maybe not, but it's better than remembering." She didn't argue, but when she lay down to sleep, she faced the fire instead of turning away. The next morning came earlier than usual. The sound of hooves in the distance woke them both. Elias grabbed his rifle and went to the window. Dust moved on the horizon, riders, maybe 2 or 3, heading toward the ranch. His stomach tightened. Nayeli stood behind him, her expression sharp. "Soldiers?" she asked. "No, too few. Bandits, maybe." He moved to the door, his limp more noticeable as he loaded the rifle. "Stay inside," he said, but she shook her head. "If they come, I stay. You can't fight with that arm." She looked at him, her voice steady. "I already fought worse." Elias didn't argue further. He knew better than to waste time on pride. As the riders drew closer, he recognized one of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, someone from a past he thought was buried. His name was Tanner Cobb, a drifter, a thief, a man Elias once rode with before walking away from that kind of life. The 3 riders stopped near the fence line. Tanner grinned. "Didn't think you were still breathing, Rourke." Elias kept the rifle steady. "You should have kept it that way." Tanner laughed. "Easy now. We just want food and rest. Maybe some company." His eyes moved toward the open door where Nayeli stood behind Elias, her expression cold. Elias's grip tightened. "You got 5 seconds to turn around." The man beside Tanner spat in the dust. "He's bluffing." Elias fired once. The shot hit the ground inches from the man's boot. For seconds now, Tanner raised his hand. All right, we're moving." He turned his horse slowly, the grin gone from his face. "Didn't know you kept company now, Elias." "Careful. Things like that don't end clean out here." They rode off, dust trailing behind. Elias watched until they were specks against the horizon. When he turned back, Nayeli was still standing there, her face unreadable. "They will come again," she said. "I know. You afraid?" "Not of them." She tilted her head. "Then what?" He looked past her, at the land stretching into the dying light. "Of losing what's left." She said nothing more, but when he went inside, she followed. For the first time, she helped him bar the door. They didn't speak of what had just happened. They didn't need to. That night, Elias lay awake on the floor, listening to her slow breathing near the fire. He thought of everything that had brought them here. The raid, the guilt, the silence, and now the new danger waiting on the horizon. For years, he had lived with nothing to lose. Now, for the first time, he felt the weight of something fragile and worth protecting. And that feeling, more than any bandit or ghost, scared him most. The morning came quiet and gray. A low mist had gathered over the dry valley, something rare for the Arizona plains. Elias stood on the porch with his rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The men from yesterday hadn't returned, but his gut told him they would. Tanner Cobb was not the kind of man to walk away from pride or unfinished business. Inside, Naeli stirred the ashes in the stove and started the fire again. The air carried the smell of smoke and boiled coffee. She moved carefully, her arms still healing, her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. When Elias came in, she glanced at him but said nothing. Words had become less necessary between them. The silence they shared was no longer sharp. It was the space where trust lived, fragile but real. He took a seat by the table. "You sleep?" he asked. "Enough. You still thinking about leaving?" Her eyes lifted briefly to his. "Maybe, but not today." That was all she said, but was enough to ease something in him. They ate in silence. After breakfast, Elias checked the barn and horses, reinforcing the doors with heavy beams. He fixed the hinges on the shutters and filled his sack with ammunition. Naeli watched him from the doorway. "They will come," she asked. "Probably. Then we fight." He looked up at her, his voice low. "You don't have to. I stay," she said simply. "I not run again." Her words settled between them with the weight of promise. She had run before, Elias could tell. He had never asked from who, but now he saw the truth in her eyes. She hadn't been just lost in the desert. She had been hunted. Maybe by men like Tanner. Maybe worse. Later that day, the sound came again, distant hooves, faint but steady. Elias cursed under his breath and stepped outside. 3 riders this time. Same direction, same dust trail. Tanner was leading them. The sun was still low, throwing long shadows behind the horses. Naeli joined him at the door, gripping his spare rifle. Her hands didn't shake. "You sure?" Elias asked quietly. She nodded. "I remember how to aim." They took positions, the cabin door half open, Elias by the window, Naeli crouched near the table. The first shot came before the riders reached the yard, a warning round that hit the fence post and split it in two. Elias answered with his own, quick and clean. The echo rolled across the valley like thunder. Tanner's voice shouted from the distance. "You think you can hide behind that wall forever, Rourke? We ain't here for your land." Elias shouted back, "Then turn around and keep breathing. Not without what's ours." Tanner yelled, "And maybe that woman too." That last part made something in Elias snap. He fired again, closer this time, hitting Tanner's hat clean off. The man ducked behind his horse, cursing. The other 2 returned fire, bullets cracking against the cabin walls. Dust fell from the rafters. Naeli fired once through the window, and one of the men dropped from his saddle. The gunfight lasted minutes, but it felt longer. When the smoke cleared, 2 bodies lay still in the yard. Tanner, bleeding from his shoulder, tried to crawl back to his horse. Elias stepped out, rifle trained on him. Naeli followed, holding the second gun. Tanner looked up, grinning even through the pain. "You always were too soft, Rourke. You could have joined us. Made something out of this dust." "I made something," Elias said, his tone steady. "Peace." Tanner spat blood in the dirt. "Peace don't last. Not for men like you." Elias didn't answer. He leveled the rifle, but Naeli stepped forward before he could shoot. She stared down at Tanner for a long moment. "You hurt people?" she asked. He laughed weakly. "All my life." She fired once. The sound echoed across the open land. When the echo faded, she stood still, the rifle heavy in her hands. Elias watched her face. No satisfaction, no fear, just finality. She turned toward him. "It's over." He nodded. "It is." They buried the bodies behind the ridge. The wind blew dry earth over the shallow graves, carrying away the smell of gunpowder. When they returned to the cabin, the sun was setting, painting everything in faded gold. Elias washed his hands in the trough while Naeli sat on the porch steps, quiet, her eyes on the horizon. He joined her. For a long time, they didn't speak. Then she said, "Those men, they killed my husband. Took everything. I ran for years. Thought maybe I'd find them. Maybe I'd die trying." She paused, voice rough. "I did not think I would find you instead." Elias stared at the fading sky. "You did, and you killed my people." "I did," he said, "but you also saved me." He looked at her, searching her face. "That doesn't erase it." "No," she said, "but maybe it changes what comes next." The evening grew colder. Elias fetched a blanket from inside and handed it to her. She took it, fingers brushing his for a brief moment. He felt a strange calm settle over him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was something quieter. As night fell, the cabin's lamplight glowed faintly through the window. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and old wood. Elias sat near the fire while Naeli cleaned the rifles. Their movements were slow, steady, unhurried. The danger was gone, but both understood what it had cost. Before she lay down to rest, she said, "Tomorrow, I will help you fix the fence." He nodded, surprised by how natural it sounded. "All right." Then she added softly, "And maybe after, I stay for a while." Elias didn't answer, but his eyes held gratitude, quiet and deep. He looked into the fire and felt the weight in his chest ease. The ghosts of the past were still there, but their voices had grown softer. Outside, the wind died down completely, and for the first time in years, the valley was silent. Not empty, but peaceful. Inside that silence, two people who had nothing left began to build something small and human, a reason to stay. The morning after the gunfight came with stillness. The sky was pale and wide, the kind of blue that looked almost fragile after days of dust and smoke. Elias woke early, his body sore from tension more than pain. The land outside was calm again, no signs of movement, just the faint smell of gunpowder that lingered around the graves behind the ridge. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps coming after him, no ghosts with rifles in their hands. Inside the cabin, Naeli was already awake. She had cleaned the floor, boiled coffee, and started repairing one of the torn shirts Elias had left near the chair. The smell of the fire mixed with the sharp scent of coffee, grounding the room in something that felt almost like peace. Elias stood by the door, watching her in silence. "You didn't sleep much," he said finally. She didn't look up. "No need. My dreams are not kind." He nodded. "Same here." She poured coffee into 2 cups and handed him one. Her hand brushed his briefly. It wasn't deliberate, but neither of them pulled away. For a long moment, they just stood there, the quiet between them filled with the soft crackle of the fire. After breakfast, they worked on the fence together. The boards were splintered from stray bullets, the posts leaning after years of neglect. Elias held the new, wood steady, while Naeli hammered the nails. She was strong and methodical, her movements precise. He could see that she had worked hard before. Farm work, maybe, or survival. When she stopped to rest, sweat glistened on her forehead. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. "Back where?" she said. "Your people." Her eyes drifted toward the horizon. There is nothing left there. The land, maybe, but not the people. He understood that kind of emptiness too well. "Then you'll stay here?" She looked at him briefly. "If I stay, what would I be?" He thought for a second. "Whatever you choose." She smiled faintly. "You say that like the world gives choice." He met her gaze. "Sometimes we take it anyway." By noon, the fence was repaired. Elias's limp had worsened from the work, and Naeli noticed. She took the hammer from his hand. "You walk wrong," she said. "Old wound. Can't fix it." "Maybe not," she said, "but you should rest." He grinned slightly. "You giving orders now?" "Yes," she replied, without smiling. "Someone has to." They sat under the shade of the porch. Elias rolled a cigarette, but didn't light it. The wind picked up, carrying bits of dust across the yard. He looked at her, then at the small garden patch by the barn. "You said you ran for years," he said carefully. "Before you came here." "Yes." "Who were you running from?" "Men who kill my husband," she answered simply. "They followed me for months. When I lost them, I was already half dead. That's when I found you." He nodded slowly. "Tanner's men." She looked up at him. "You know them?" "I rode with Tanner once. Long ago, before the army. We robbed, drank, made enemies. When I joined the scouts, I told myself it was better than being him. It wasn't." She studied his face. "Then maybe both of us have ghosts." "Too many," he said. Evening came early. They cooked outside, using a small fire pit behind the cabin. The meal was simple, beans and dried meat, but it felt different this time. They ate slowly, watching the sun sink into the hills. The land that had once looked barren now carried warmth in its light. Elias noticed how the gold reflected in Naeli's eyes, how her features softened when she wasn't guarded. After they ate, she spoke quietly. "You ever think about leaving this place?" "I used to," he said, "but it's the only place that doesn't ask questions." She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe it asks one. What's that? Why are you still here?" He didn't answer right away. The question dug deeper than she knew. "Maybe because leaving means starting over. And I don't think I deserve that." Her expression changed, not pity, just understanding. "You think I deserved what happened to me?" "No," he said quickly. "Then why not you?" He had no answer. The truth was, he didn't know anymore. The night deepened. A half-moon hung above the canyon, throwing pale light across the dry land. Inside the cabin, the lamplight glowed faintly. Naeli sat near the fire, brushing her hair. Elias watched her quietly from the table. She looked different now, still fierce, but softer in the way she moved, no longer driven by rage alone. She noticed him looking. "What is it?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Just didn't think peace could look like this." She gave a small smile. "It won't stay. Nothing ever does." "Maybe that's fine," he said. "Sometimes a moment's enough." She stood and approached him. "You still think you don't deserve to live?" He met her eyes. "Maybe I'm learning to." Her hand touched his shoulder, light but certain. "Then stop carrying what's already buried." They stood like that for a while. No words, no movement. Just the sound of firewood crackling and the wind outside brushing against the window shutters. Before they went to sleep, Naeli spread her blanket near the hearth again, but this time Elias didn't lie on the floor. He sat across from her, both of them facing the fire. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "we fix the garden." "All right," he replied. "And after that, we see what the land gives." As the flames dimmed, she looked at him one last time before closing her eyes. "You're not the man who burned my world," she said softly. "That man died already." Elias didn't respond. He just stared into the fading fire, his chest tightening with something that felt close to forgiveness, but not for her, for himself. Outside, the wind had stopped completely. The land lay silent under the moonlight, holding its breath. Inside the small wooden cabin, two people who once had nothing left were beginning, slowly and quietly, to belong somewhere again. The year turned quietly on the land. The dry season faded into one touched by rare rain, soft and thin, soaking into the soil just enough to give life to the patches of green that had been missing for years. Elias stood at the edge of the field one morning, his boots half sunk in damp earth, watching the water settle into small pools. It was the first time he had seen the land breathe in a long while. Behind him, Naeli was gathering laundry from the line, her hair unbraided and moving slightly with the breeze. The cabin looked different now, less like a shelter and more like a home. The fence stood straight, the barn door fixed, and a small vegetable patch stretched along the side of the corral. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "Sky looks kind today," Elias said, his voice steady, almost content. Naeli looked up at the faint clouds above the ridge. "It remembers mercy, sometimes." He smiled faintly at that. Her English had improved, still sharp and deliberate, but smoother, less strained. The months had softened many things. Her words, his silence, the sharp edges between them. When the work was done, they sat on the porch with cups of coffee, the air warm but not cruel. Elias leaned against the post, his leg still giving him trouble, though it no longer ruled his days. Naeli glanced at him. "You walk easier," she said. He nodded. "Maybe it's the company." She gave him a look that was half amused, half warning. "You talk too much now." "Getting old," he said. "Old men start filling the quiet." For a while, they listened to the sounds of life returning. The creak of the windmill, the horse's slow steps, the faint whistle of the wind through the grass. It felt like the kind of peace that couldn't be bought or explained, only lived through. But beneath the calm, small questions lingered, things that neither of them had spoken of in full. The night of the raid, the soldiers' names, the child Naeli had lost. Elias had never asked, not out of fear, but out of respect. Yet he knew there would come a time when silence would no longer be enough. That time came one evening when the wind carried the scent of rain again. They were sitting by the fire, Naeli sewing a tear in one of his shirts while Elias sharpened a knife at the table. The rhythm of the blade against the stone filled the cabin. Finally, she spoke. "When I ran from my village," she said, her voice low but steady, "I carried something. A small blanket. My son's." Elias's hand froze mid-motion. "I buried it before I came here," she continued. "I thought maybe I could forget his face if I didn't see the blanket. But I can't. I still see him when I sleep." Elias set the knife down. "You don't have to forget him." Her eyes lifted toward him. "Do you remember the people from that night?" He took a slow breath. "Some. Not faces, just fire, orders, smoke. I've tried to remember them all. I owe them that." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe that is enough." Remembering. They said nothing else for a long time. The firelight flickered on their faces, drawing out the years of wear, the scars that didn't show on skin. Elias wanted to tell her that he was sorry again, but he knew it wouldn't matter. She already knew. When morning came, Naeli packed a small bundle, her beads, a few clothes, the turquoise necklace she had always worn. Elias watched her from the doorway. "You leaving?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I go to the ridge. I will bring my son's blanket back." He nodded once. "You want me to come?" "No," she said. "Some things I have to walk alone." She left after sunrise. Elias spent the day working the soil near the creek, checking the fence lines, fixing what time and wind had damaged. But his mind wasn't on the work. It was with her, out there among the rocks and graves and memories neither of them could bury deep enough. When the sun was setting, he saw her returning down the trail, the small bundle in her hands. She walked slowly, not in sorrow, but in peace. When she reached the cabin, she placed the bundle gently on the table. "He stays here now," she said simply. Elias nodded, his throat tightening. He reached out and rested his hand lightly over hers. "Then he's home." The following days moved with quiet rhythm. They worked, ate, and rested, each moment feeling like a small act of rebuilding. Elias fixed the roof again, added a second chair to the porch. Naeli planted flowers by the fence, small desert blooms, fragile but persistent. One evening, when the sky turned deep orange, Elias sat beside her on the porch. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She turned to him, her face calm. "I think about today. Tomorrow will come by itself." He smiled faintly. "That's good enough." He reached out and took her hand, not out of passion or impulse, but with quiet certainty. She didn't pull away. They sat like that until the stars appeared, the desert around them breathing with the sounds of night. Later, inside, Naeli unrolled the small blanket and placed it near the window where the moonlight touched it. Elias watched her, his chest heavy with something new. Not guilt, not regret, but gratitude. When they lay down to sleep, the wind outside was gentle, brushing softly against the cabin walls. Naeli whispered before her eyes closed, "We survived." Elias answered quietly, "We lived." And that was the truth neither had dared to speak before. The story that had begun in blood and loss now ended in stillness. Two broken lives shaped by pain, but mended by the simple act of staying. The land no longer felt cursed. It was alive again, filled with work, silence, and the kind of love that didn't need to be spoken. Outside, the first rain of a new season began to fall, soft and steady, washing the dust from the earth as the world around them finally learned to breathe again. The end.